When it comes to lenses for the ZV-E10, I think this lens is the king of them all. And just to give you an idea, right now I am shooting on a little 30-watt light, and I've got that at 2%. In addition to that, I've just got that tiny little background lamp on. Now I'm going to switch to the kit lens, and you're going to see what a difference this lens makes. Now I've got all the settings the same. All I've done is change the lens. We are now at 16 millimeters on the kit lens, and the kit lens only has a maximum aperture of f3.5. Now we're back on my most recommended low light lens for the ZV-E10. And first I want to take you through why I think this lens is so good. And really there's probably three lenses that I think are in the running for this. There's the Sigma 16mm, there is the Sony 15mm, and there's the Viltrox 13mm. Now all three of these lenses shoot at a maximum aperture of f1.4. And that number, that f1.4, is how wide the opening is in the lens to allow light in. And the smaller that number, the more light that is let in. The little kit lens only opens to f3.5, and you saw the difference between that when I switched between those two lenses, how little light that lens lets in. Now, that image was underexposed, and if I was using this in a normal situation and I wanted to expose that image properly with the kit lens, I would have to increase my ISO number. And the ISO number is essentially how hard your camera has to work to be able to see the image with the light that is available to the sensor. And the higher that ISO number goes, the worse your footage looks. So if you've ever shot in low light conditions, particularly with the kit lens, and you've noticed that the image just looks like smeary and grainy and off and not right, that is purely the amount of light that is coming into the camera isn't sufficient, and the camera has to increase that ISO number to be able to see the image. Think of it as the camera's version of having to squint to see something properly. Now coming back to these three lenses, which I think are in the running to be the best low light lens, there's a few things that we need to look at. They all have that f1.4 aperture. That means they're all going to essentially allow the same amount of light to hit the sensor. The problem with these lenses, all of them, is that none of them are image stabilized. And that provides a couple of problems. One, our video footage is going to be more shaky because we don't have that image stabilization in the lens. Two, we can have a problem with our photos being blurry because in those low light conditions, we're often going to have a lower shutter speed, which is how long the camera opens the shutter to allow the light in to hit the sensor before it closes it. And in low light conditions, it has to open that shutter for longer to let as much light in as possible. And for that reason, we need that image hitting the sensor to be as stable as possible. This is going to give us sharper photos in low light. This is going to get us more stable video in low light. And since there is no active stabilization in the lens, we have to look at how stable the image is in a passive sense. And essentially, when I talk about passive stabilization, I'm talking about the focal length on these different lenses. And effectively what that means is the bigger that number, whether it be 15 millimeters, 16 millimeters, 17 millimeters, the bigger that number on the lens, the more unstable the footage is going to be. And if you've ever tried to take a shot of something with a really zoomed in telephoto lens, or you're looking through binoculars and sort of even a little movement in your hand is shaking and stuff is going everywhere, that is because the more zoomed in you are, the less stable the image is, and the more zoomed out you are, the more stable the image is. And when we look at these three different lenses, we've got three different levels of stability. We've got the 16mm Sigma, which is going to be the least stable. We've got the 15mm Sony, which is going to be the second least stable. And then we're going to get the 13mm Viltrox, which is going to be the most stable. And it's going to be the most stable by a reasonable margin. And that's because it has got that bigger field of view. And when you move your hands, the less the image actually moves when it's hitting the sensor. So you're going to get your most stable video footage, and you're going to be able to get your sharpest photos out of the Viltrox 13mm f1.4. In addition to that, the ZV-E10 does have a digital stabilization, active stabilization that is built into the camera. The problem with that is it has a huge crop in. So when you put it into active stabilization, it cuts as much as sort of 40% of the image off. It really crops in hard. And because of that, the wider that field of view we start with, the more usable and wide the image is once we crop in on it. And if you use the Viltrox 13mm, even with that active stabilization, it's actually still got enough space that I can hold it at sort of just not even a full arm's width, and I can vlog with that, and I get enough of the scene in to vlog with that. Once you step up to that 15 or 16mm, it starts to get very tight, and you start to get more just sort of your head in the scene. So the 13mm, that wide field of view, makes that active stabilization usable in video. And for those reasons, I think the Viltrox 13mm f1.4 is the best low light lens you can buy for the ZV-E10. And I will throw a link in the description down below to the best pricing that I could find on this lens. And if you're interested in turning your ZV-E10 into a portrait photography and cinematic video beast, I've just thrown a video on screen now. I think the images in this video are going to blow you away.